All right, good afternoon and welcome to the White House Fellows Podcast. Each month, I spend some time talking with a fellow about the program, about our experiences, and about how it changed both our lives and our careers. We're also going to take time to answer your questions and provide some tips for the application process. I'm David Moore. I'm the Executive Director of the White House Fellows Alumni Association. I was a fellow in 1996-97. During my fellowship year, I was assigned to the State Department, where I worked for the Undersecretary for International Security Affairs. Joining me on our podcast today is Monica Deuce. She was a White House Fellow this past year, a member of the class of 2023-2024, where she worked at the Department of the Navy, working on science education and force resiliency. Monica is a scientist and a college professor at the University of Michigan, and she has, as I mentioned, she's just finished her fellowship year. She is now back in the lab and writing a book about food and genes with a G. So let me start by sharing a little bit about the White House Fellows Program. It was created in 1964. We've now served 11 presidents. Typically, the President's Commission on White House Fellowship selects about a dozen or so fellows each year. In total, 894 people have been selected as fellows thus far, and 810 are living. It is a nonpartisan program. I think in many ways one of the last or one of very few in Washington, D.C. these days. Applicants come from across the country and across a range of backgrounds and professions. One of the most interesting things about the fellowship is that there is no particular career field that you have to be in. The only requirements are that you be an American citizen and that you have completed your undergraduate degree. But otherwise, there are, everyone from scientists to lawyers to fighter pilots to bankers to authors to educators and everything else you can imagine. So it's one of the great elements of strength, diversity, and fun about the program. I'm going to talk, Monica and I are going to talk for the first half of the podcast about our experiences, and then we're going to turn it over to your questions. And before we break for that, I'm going to show you, actually, let me do it right now. I'm going to share my screen with you and show you some of the frequently asked questions on our website. So if you go to our homepage, which is whff.org, which you can see right there, you'll see that down at the bottom of the page, way down, all kinds of interesting, details about the program there. And one of the most helpful elements is right here at the bottom of the page. I can get it to expand, excuse me, are our frequently asked questions. And down here, they're at the bottom of the page. Sorry for the technical difficulties here, folks. Let me get this right. There we go. We answer things like, how are there age limits to the program? Are there other specific? Here we go. Full screen is the key. What's the experience like during the fellowship year? How do I apply? Is there a calendar? What if I'm a dual citizen? Are there age restrictions? So we've tried to anticipate everything you might be inclined to ask. So when Monica and I turn to answering your questions, if it's something that we've already addressed here, then we may be a bit more brief. But otherwise, we look forward to talking with you during this. So Monica, let's start by talking about your experience. And let me ask you, how did you first hear about the White House Fellowship, and what was it about the program that you found interesting, and what appealed to you about it?
Hello, David, and hello, everybody. I never heard about the White House Fellowship before, although it is not uncommon among academics. It was during the second half of COVID, and I was feeling pretty overwhelmed and sad by the state of the discourse between science and the public. And I was also, I had just gotten tenure, and I was thinking what I should do for my sabbatical that was coming up. And I was sitting in this exact chair in the parlor in my house, and my email was open, and I got an email from the National Academies of Science, and
Oh,
it was a newsletter. It was not an email to me, it was an email to everybody
mhm.
that signs up for it. And at the
Yeah.
very bottom, and I love reading those, they're so interesting. At the very bottom, it said, apply to the White House Fellowship. If you're a scientist and you're interested in science outreach, government, you should apply. And so I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. So I clicked on that link and I read about the White House Fellowship. I read about the educational opportunity, the placement, the fellowship. I also learned about Gardner, who was a PhD psychologist and academic, later became president of the Carnegie Institute, and he was a psychologist. I'm a neuroscientist, and he was really big about renewal and talked about the fellowship as serving a time where our society was really divided and fragmented. Their
Mhm.
society, I wasn't born, but it really appealed to me, and so that's why I decided to apply.
Super. Well, the application process is pretty admittedly daunting.
Mm.
It's almost a year long, and it'll the begins with an online written application, and that form will go live at on the 1st of November. Applications are due early January, and then they're followed. The written application process is followed by a series of interviews, both regional interviews and then uh, finally national interviews for the final group that are under consideration. Um, and so the placement doesn't actually begin until the following September. So it's a pretty long and arduous process in a lot of ways. Monica, what are some of the things that stand out to you about the application process, both written application and later the interviews? What do you recall, and have you got any advice for anybody who's thinking about applying?
I was definitely surprised by how personal it was and how going through each step of the application cycle made me ponder more about myself, my mission, my place in science, in the world, what I wanted to do. So um, that was super meaningful to me. It was a process of self-discovery.
Mm.
Um, I I was not used to those kind of applications because I'm a biologist, and so every application I've had to do, whether they're grants or for faculty positions, fellowships, they're always about my research.
Mm.
And science is somewhat impersonal, so they're never about me, the person, but it's about me, the scientist. And so I was really surprised how at every step of the White House Fellowship, what people wanted to know or what I had to write about was who I was, not as one part of my identity as a scientist, but as a person. And that was the part that really brought me to a lot of self discovery and was surprising.
Interesting, interesting. Yes, I think everybody who goes through the process finds themselves wrestling with things that they don't often have to consider. I remember writing the essay on what are your lifetime goals, and it requires you to sit down and think concretely about and have to articulate in 300 words or 250 words, whatever it is, exactly what your goals are and be specific.
And
Uh,
David, when after I received an email that I was selected for the regionals,
mhm.
I remember that you had just published a video preparing people for the regionals,
Yeah.
and the finals. And one, I can't remember who said that, but and that was a superbly useful video. But I remember somebody said the best way to prepare is to go on a bench by the forest or the beach,
Yeah.
whatever, and just sit there by yourself and think who you are. And I was like, "What?" But in fact, I think that was really great advice.
Did you do
Because
and did you it work?
I went running instead of sitting because I sit every day on my keyboard. And so yes, I went running and I thought about it. So I logged a lot of miles.
Good, good. I can't take credit for that advice. It was actually my classmate, Bob Orr. Um, I heard him coaching a group of candidates at one point, and I heard him give that superb advice. Great for the White House Fellowship, great for life generally. To go takes time to think, and he said, be able to answer three questions: Who am I? What do I believe in, and why?
Yes.
And if you can answer those three questions, you can do anything. Well, great. Well, so the regional interviews, when you went through, they were virtual,
Mhm.
correct? By Zoom. So what was that like? I think all of the interviews, whether they're done virtually or in person as they're at nationals, are structured roughly the same. 20 minutes for an interview, and there are two or three people asking you questions, and you're responding to each of them. Can you give us a sense of, sort of the flavor of the character, what kinds of questions you encountered?
Some questions were about who I was, what I wanted to do in life,
Mhm,
why the White House Fellowship, and why at that particular moment. So I would say that in each of the interviewers, there was an element of getting to all of those points. So
mhm,
what you said, to be able to really articulate in your mind and succinctly, because you don't have a lot of time,
yeah.
um, those answers is super important. There were also ways to get to those answers that were more creative. Um, People might ask you what your favorite superhero is or what's your superpower. Definitely things like, book you've read, or sometimes elements and things that were in the news that were
Mhm,
relevant to my profession or to my education career. So it was a pretty vast array of different topics.
mhm.
There were some um, acting in some of my interviews when
Really
somebody pretended to be somebody else and was seeing how I respond, and that was really fun actually. That happened a few
good.
times, but most of it, I think, the most important part is really to nail down who you are, what you want to do in life, and how the fellowship is going to catalyze that growth and path.
Excellent. Well, so you go through this process, you go through the regional interviews, uh, and then if selected to national round of interviews, and then from there, uh, uh, a group of about 15 or so, I think your class was 15, and I think the range is like 11 to 19. Um, Once the selections are made, you come back to Washington, D.C. The nationals are in June, and then you come back in July to interview at different offices in the White House or across the executive branch of government. You wound up serving with the Secretary of the Navy. And so I'm curious, what is a scientist who's working on food and genes? Why did the Secretary of the Navy's office appeal to you, and how did you bring your expertise to bear in that work role that you had for the next year?
Yes, that is the question I asked the same question I asked myself when I got an email from the office scheduling a phone call with the Secretary of the Navy. That was my first interview, actually. And Secretary Del Toro called me. He was traveling, he called me, and asked me some of the same questions. Why I want I and he was a White House fellow, of course, about 2 decades ago. So he asked me who I was, why I wanted to do the fellowship, what I was looking for it, and I told them that I, of course, really passionate. My great loves are science and education, and dogs and desserts too. And he told me that his focus for the year was advancing the naval education system, setting up a science and technology board and some science strategy, and also setting up a whole path towards force resiliency.
Mhm.
Part of it was about mental health, and I'm a neuroscientist. And so what he laid out seemed a perfect fit for me because, of course, I want to continue being involved in science, technology, and education. Those are my great passions,
Mhm.
and but I got the chance to experience them and see aspects of them that I never consider would have thought about it before. Um,
Mhm.
he is also an amazing person. He is an engineer and super charismatic and a really great leader. And so I was really inspired. I was really inspired by him, and I continue to be inspired. Not to
Mhm.
say that my other 6 interviews were not as interesting,
Yeah.
but this one seemed really perfectly aligned.
Mhm.
And I'm also really interested in strategy and communication, and always thought that the military does a superb and amazing job with that. And so I really wanted to experience I wanted to experience those 2 aspects, and so when
Mhm.
I was already going through the regionals and the finals, I expressed interest when people asked me, "Where would you like to go?" And I was like, "Well, probably everybody's gonna think OSTP, but actually," so yes, it was very, very different. But of course, they were also interested in me because I manage my own lab, so I do a lot of project management. I write thousands and thousands of words a week in grants and articles, so I'm a pretty good writer and communicator. And I have my own team in the lab, so I've also known and learned how to work in teams, and I teach. And so those were all very transferable skills that I think made me a really good fit for that placement, and vice versa.
Excellent, excellent. Well, talking about the placement, I would say probably 80% of the time you're a White House Fellow, you're working at your assigned placement, wherever it might be in the executive branch. And the rest of the time, you're participating in the education program. Can you give us a sense of like what, on a typical day, uh, well, tell me about a typical day as a White House Fellow from your experience.
I didn't really have a typical day, but I think how about a typical week with a few
Okay,
examples of days?
sure.
So we have what I call class, which is our educational series twice a week, and that's pretty much throughout the year. And so we talked with public and with leaders in the private and public sectors. They're really great conversations, and so you also get to see your classmates during that time. There are also other events that the fellowship might organize, some visits to different locations, or you know, I don't know, like the secret services, like learning about different aspects of government, some embassies. And so those are, I would say, are part of the educational program, but they're not the same every week. And then there is your placement. So for me, every day was a little bit different. I was also at the Pentagon when there is no reception, so it was kind of cut out from the outside world, but there's like over 20,000 people, so kind of had our own world there. And a lot of times I was traveling with the secretary. So those days were really, really busy and really exciting and learning a lot from observing, but also sometimes I got to organize some of the events for his trip. So those was running around. I was generally also inside the Pentagon, having meetings, going to different offices, trying to find those offices in the Pentagon early on. So for me, no day was really the same,
Mhm.
which was really different than my life as an academic, where I have class and then I have my office and then I talk to the people in my lab. Every day was like really, really full of excitement.
I think you sent me an email somewhere about a couple of months into your fellowship year, and you said, "Oh my gosh, I'm here up at this gathering. I want to say it was up in Philadelphia," and you said, "I just what happened today made the whole experience worth
Yeah.
it." Do you remember that? Can you tell us
Yes,
about it?
yes, because I saw a submarine. It was like pretty early on. We went to the commissioning on the Hyman Rickover, now submarine, and then Rickover was the father of the nuclear navy. So I got to learn about the really incredible story of
Mhm.
ingenuity and the power of science and engineering of how the nuclear navy was created. And then I got to see the submarine, and it blew my mind because I never knew anything about that. So that day is when I fell in love with the Navy's brain. I was like, oh, these are my people. They're huge nerds. Yes. Um, and it was really great. There was also the social elements or the sailors and people coming together. So it was really fantastic. It was really early on. I think it was probably a month into my
Yeah,
fellowship.
that's great. That's wonderful. Well, so you mentioned your class of fellows, and how you get together, and you often travel together as a group, perhaps domestically, perhaps internationally. Um, Tell me about your classmates. Who are they, and who are you as a group? Are you guys
Uh,
close?
Yes, we were really close. Our class was very close knit from the very beginning. And we were very much about trying to be as inclusive as possible, and really try to make a community, try to be open with each other and vulnerable, and making sure we were there to support each other when, sometimes there's a pretty steep learning curve of like walking into an entirely new world with a different language and often different expectations and maybe values. And so sometimes you might get blindsided, sometimes you're feverish with excitement, like me with the submarine. It happens for different people at different times. And so, uh, we were great. I really miss them so much. We also had so many dinners together, mostly dinners because during the day it's really busy. There's not really time to like even eat sometimes. But we had a lot of dinners at the end of the day together, lots of debriefs, um, quite a few brunches. We went kayaking together, but mostly a lot of eating, lots of desserts, lots of walks, runs. We run the Double Blossom, the Army 10 miler. There's definitely one more run we run there that I forgot, some of us.
Yeah.
So it's been really great. And I never really had friends that are not scientists. Uh,
Hmm.
and yeah, what a loss. It was a great time.
They're
As
not lost. They're still there. They're still your
Yeah, yeah. No, what a
friends.
loss that I didn't do it before. Yes, I
Ah,
know I
yes.
miss them so much though. And it was amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, I missed them a lot.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something really interesting there. You said all your friends up to then had been scientists. And I think that's true of so many professions. If you're a lawyer, you spend a lot of time with lawyers. If you're a banker, you spend a lot of time with bankers. If you're in the military, you spend a lot of time with people in the military. And each of those professions trains people to think and analyze problems in a certain way. And so if you get a group of lawyers together, and you say, here's a problem, they're all going to probably look at it a similar way and come up with a similar solution. But when you bring together people from so many different professions, and backgrounds and parts of the country and put them together and then throw a problem at them, I was just amazed and blown away by how diverse the thought and experience was of my classmates as we, met with different challenges, questions, and opportunities. And so I think that's one of the great benefits of the fellowship is not just having this group of people that you grow very close to, and by the way, that closeness continues on beyond the fellowship through the rest of your life. But it's also the fact that they come from such a variety of backgrounds. And then the third element that is so intriguing is that you're all placed in different offices across the federal government. So you are plugged in like a circuit breaker right into the nerve center of the highest levels of government. So if you have a question about, the U.S., what the U.S. trade representative is doing, you have someone in your class you can ask. If you have a question about Department of Commerce or Department of Labor or Department of State or Department of Education or energy, you have someone you can turn to who has an inside, if not an inside channel, firsthand experience in that agency that they can share with you. And I think that's one of the things that is so profoundly interesting about the fellowship and the opportunities that we've had. So we're going to open it up here in just a minute to our audience to let them ask questions. Before we do, Monica, what advice do you have, just sort of big picture, about people who are thinking about applying for the program, and how do they know if it's the right time for them?
I definitely didn't. I knew the program was going to be that you keep hearing it's a very intense year, um, and I'm used to having pretty intense years because I work pretty long hours as an academic, but actually, it is truly intense. So do make sure that it aligns with your ongoing commitments and then you plan. And I would say don't don't wait until you get in to start planning. I think once you apply, start making the plan as that might take a while to develop as if you were actually leaving for Washington
Mhm.
because some things take a very long time. For an academic, I had definitely had to think about my students, my labs, my grants, my sources of funding. And those are not things that I could have done within a month. I had to think a lot
Mhm.
before how to arrange them.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that whether it's the right, so where you are in life and whether it's it's your time,
Mhm.
but where is your family?
Mhm.
And if you're a caregiver, because I you will be spending significant time away from them, and they're a big part of the equation. And essentially, you're not in this by yourself if you have a family or you're a caregiver. And so I think you have to make sure you make plans for how your family is going
Mhm.
uh, to do during that year.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm so glad Alex was able to come with you to
yeah.
DC and work from here. So that I know
And
that made a
brioche.
difference. Yeah, indeed. Um, what about one final question for you before we open it up to everybody else? Scientists. Um, how important is it for scientists to apply to the program? I know this is something that's sort of near and dear to your heart.
I think it is so critical. Recently, I was applying for yet another grant, and in there, it had an essay and it asked, "What's the most important thing I've done so far in my career in science?" And I would have said, this things I published, this thing I've discovered, this person I've trained. But actually, I wrote in there that the most important thing I did was actually leaving science for a year, because now I really understand much more how people think, how the world thinks, how the government runs different agencies. I understand strategy and flexibility, bureaucracy, opportunities, the importance of clear and targeted communication. And it's not that I did not know those things before, is that now I understand them because I've lived them. And I'm sure there's a lot more I need to learn. And I'm excited about that. I mean, learning is my favorite thing.
Yeah,
Um, but I do think it's been a really fantastic experience to understand. It's really helped me to understand more science's place in the world.
excellent, excellent. Thank you so much.